Anyway, members and members of the general public, welcome to this Derbyshire Dales Planning Committee, the July meeting. Before I move on, just a bit of housekeeping. If you do hear the fire alarm, please leave by the double doors, go down outside the main corridor, outside the main doors, and please congregate on the back of the car park. Thank you very much. If any person here is not wanting to be recorded, because these meetings are recorded, especially the general public, please indicate to one of the committee clerks and they will stop the recording while you're speaking. Anyway, before we move on, I'm going to rejig the agenda. So when we move on to the agenda properly, we're going to take 5.6 first, which is a Nether Hillside Farm being in Ashpool. So anyway, item 1, apologies and absence, please, Angela.
Thank you, Chair. Apologies from Councillor Archer,
Gina.
Councillor Elliott, Councillor Froggatt, substitute Councillor Wakeman.
Thank you very much. Item 2, approval of minutes of the previous meeting.
Second, Chair.
All those in favour, please shout. Thank you very much. So anyway, members, straight on. Taking 5.6 first. So anyway, Councillor Wakeman, have you got, sorry, interest? Yeah, you've got interest.
Yeah, I've got an interest in 5.7.
Right, is that a pecuniary interest or?
Yeah, just a friend of mine.
Right, so you won't be making a contribution, you'll be leaving the meeting? Yep. Yeah. Okay. So anyway, moving on. Like I say, the first application is 5.6. There's some late reps on it, so before we get the speakers out, take a couple of minutes to read that and then we'll move on. Right, members, are you happy? Okay. So anyway, the first on my list is Miss Louise Redford, local resident, to speak against the application. You have 3 minutes, and I'll indicate when you have 30 seconds left. So if you'd like to come to the microphone. If you'd like to turn the microphone on. That's it. Press the button to turn it. That's it.
Hello. Hi. Good evening.
Right, you have 3 minutes. I'll let you know when you have 30 seconds left.
Good evening, committee. Thank you for letting me speak. My name's Louise Redford and I live below at Winster Cottage, which is on the base of the mountain, Gorsey Mountain of Hillside, where Nether Hillside Farm is situated. I'm here today to object to this proposed demolition of an original period property, which is a perfectly fine period property, very like other dwellings in the parish and in the neighbourhood. And there's no reason why this building cannot be restored. It is of architectural merit. I argue the case officer's reasons that it is of architectural merit and it could be a beautiful restored property, extended, still staying nestled into the hillside and not affecting the neighbouring properties and the countryside location. You know, this will fundamentally change the landscape and destroy a period property if this planning application is allowed and permitted. And it is wrong that it should be destroyed in order to allow for a proposed building out of this scale, which I don't even think comes under the planning policy HC7. It's nearly 4 times the size of my property. It's nearly twice as high. It overlooks us. It's being protruded to the front of the hillside, while it will dominate the whole valley and our property. We will have nowhere to hide from this property. I don't understand why this is even being considered today. Like other similar historic dwellings in the area, there was one called Birch's Cottage that was applied to be demolished and was refused by planning. It's historically there now, still standing, beautifully renovated, remaining the historic feeling of the parish and the community, still enjoying it. This proposed building, it's got a vast amount of glass which will glare. We will see the south and west side of the building. The light pollution will be enormous, which we have very little of in Big Ed. The privacy will just be removed. We will have no privacy. It resembles a public house, not a home. You know, I keep saying to my husband, it looks like Chatsworth House is going to be built above us.
30 seconds left.
And a friend commented, this is Biggin by Holland, it's not Beverly Hills. Why are we allowing buildings like this to fundamentally change and damage our countryside? So I strongly appeal to you who are here on the committee to oppose this and reject this application.
Okay, thank you very much. The next on my list is Mr. William Hibbert, Biggin Parish Meeting, to speak against the application. Similarly, you have 3 minutes. I'll let you know when you have 30 seconds left.
The application involves 2 issues, demolition and proposed new building. First, demolition. The existing property is a good example of a small, attractive Georgian house. It stands in an unspoiled agricultural landscape dotted about with small farms similar to this property. It is, in fact, one of the oldest buildings in the area. As the Derbyshire Historic Buildings Trust says, it merits retention as a non-designated heritage asset. The focus of much of the criticism of the property is the condition of the recently built extension. There is no objection to removing that, but the 18th century core building is a different matter. Yes, the old farmhouse, like all 18th century buildings, has problems and will need to be renovated, but it has stood for at least 250 years, and the applicant's surveyor's report acknowledges that with underpinning and so on, restoration is perfectly feasible. What the surveyor's report concludes is that demolition is better than remedial work because of, and I quote, overall economic constraints and a profitable return. A profitable return is not a relevant consideration. Under policy 8C7, demolition can only take place if you decide that the existing dwelling does not make a positive contribution to landscape character or distinctiveness. The building is not dominated by the extension, and any public views are not overwhelmed by it. You've seen the building for yourselves, and you've seen photographs of it. And landscape character and distinctiveness is not just about public views. It includes the presence of historic buildings in context. As for the proposed new building, this is of a wholly different order. 5 bedrooms, en-suites, several receptions, office, gym, 2 saunas, cinema, a swimming pool, 6-car garaging. You have the scale of the proposed building well in mind. But AC7 provides that the scale, form, design, and massing of the replacement dwelling must not detract from the character or appearance of its setting or surroundings. Given the character and setting and surrounding around Biggin by Holland, it clearly does detract. As Biggin's written representations explain, the proposal is also contrary to other policies in the local plan. In particular, policy PD5, development will only be permitted if the location, materials, scale, and use are sympathetic and complement the landscape character. Policy S4, the District Council will seek to ensure that new development protects and, where possible, enhances the landscape's intrinsic character and distinctiveness, including the character, appearance, integrity of the historic and cultural environment.
30 seconds left.
Policy S4, in the case of replacement buildings, they must bring about environmental improvement, with its large rooms, overall size, swimming pool, cinema, saunas, large amount of glass. The energy footprint will be extremely large and it won't be an environmental improvement. The applicant proposes to destroy forever, because of course demolition means it's gone forever, part of the local heritage in order to impose on the neighbourhood a building wholly out of keeping with the area.
Thank you very much.
Planning policies exist to prevent this.
Thank you. Next on my list is Miss Georgina Geraghty, local resident, to speak against the application. You have 3 minutes, and I'll let you know when you have 30 seconds left.
I'm attending this evening on behalf of Kirkhighton Parish Council. All councillors strongly object to this application and fully support the views of Biggin Parish Council. It does not comply with the Kirkhighton Neighbourhood Plan. It is obtrusive by its design, scale, and concerningly detrimental to the landscape, not being reflective of the character of the area as a whole. Referring to the neighbourhood plan, and in particular to the policies development section, which concludes, this policy offers protection to the highly sensitive landscape surrounding the village as described in the Kirkhighton Conservation Area Character Appraisal and the Landscape Sensitivity Study. Also, under protecting views, its objections are to protect the valued views from the village to surrounding countryside in all directions, and under conservation area stating development proposals should promote, reinforce and enhance the area's local distinctiveness and be sensitive to the heritage context in terms of design, materials, scale and light pollution. The farmhouse built in the vernacular, thus being in harmony with its surroundings and neighbouring properties in Biggin and Kirkhighton, despite having been poorly altered in parts over the years, still retains its character and is of historic merit. To these attributes, we can conclude that the proposed dwelling has none and is completely out of character for this setting, more in keeping perhaps with a city or another country. The farmhouse, which could be sympathetically renovated and extended, is not being fully appreciated. This is an opportunity to preserve and enhance a historic example of a Derbyshire property. People don't want our landscape to change that much that we don't recognise it, to lose traditional characteristics of our Derbyshire architecture, and ask why the use of all this glass. The enormity of the proposed dwelling is very alarming and is equivalent to 8 average-sized detached houses.
30 seconds left.
8. The light pollution caused would be so detrimental, the impact should be of great concern. As with many of our rural and spoilt areas, the property's careful consideration should be given to their protection and preservation for the future. Please enable this to happen. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Next on my list is Miss Wendy Whitbread, local resident, to speak against the application. You have 3 minutes, and I'll let you know when you have 30 seconds left.
Give me time to get there. Okay. I am absolutely astounded that approval of this application has been recommended by the case officer, who appears to have ignored all the objections, listed as 35 valid points, from those most affected by this proposal, plus an historic building expert who identifies the homestead as an NDHA. I have already shown that the application does not comply with NPPF 80 and local planning policies S4, AMRS, PD5 and 7, P1 and 2, nor does it meet HC7 criteria by failing D, E and G. NPPF policies 130, 131, 132 support the retention of heritage assets such as the original homestead. The District Council's local plan states, the strategy for the rural parishes is to ensure that new development does not have any significant adverse impact upon the character and appearance of these villages and the surrounding countryside. This is supported by policy S9 and EC8D. Those who visited the site will have seen the flat area, the existing drive, which means the hillside will be cut into to accommodate the entire build and top parking area. If you have read all the submitted comments, you will know this proposal wants to demolish an early 1700s farm homestead with period features and build a much larger and longer construction of up to 3 stories. The garage entrance is above ground, hardly a basement. The existing homestead is sideways on the hillside, on the only other flat area, and has blended into the landscape for over 300 years. The extension makes no difference to this. By stark contrast, the proposed new build with its rows of large windows, recessed or not, rendering and design will not only have a detrimental impact on nearby neighbours, but will be highly visible and, to coin a phrase, be a decided blot on the landscape, spoiling a rural hillside at the edge of the Ecclesbourne Valley for good. Construction materials needed for the proposed type of building will need heavy traffic on our narrow country lanes where passing places are very few. Previous construction traffic has already caused damage, which has been reported. Therefore, in the interests of conserving our heritage, the beauty of our landscape, which draws walkers and holidaymakers, as well as the residents in Hullam Ward who will have views of the build across the valley, I ask you to refuse this application as it stands. We, not the case officer, will have to bear the consequences if you approve this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right, the last on my list is Mr. Tim Allen, the agent, to speak in favour of the application. You have 5 minutes. I'll let you know when there's 30 seconds left.
Thank you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Tim Allen from Greenford Architects, and I'm speaking on behalf of the applicant for the proposed replacement dwelling at Nether Hillside Farm. I'm grateful for the opportunity to provide some supporting clarification in respect of this proposal, but noting that the planning officer's report recommends the application for approval, I don't intend to take up more time than is necessary on this very warm evening. The scheme has been subject to significant liaison with your planning officers during its development, and we believe that this current proposal represents the culmination of these discussions. We've carefully taken on board the concerns and points raised by officers in amending the scheme, and are pleased to see that officers consider that we have now met their requirements for development on this site. The scheme is recommended for approval subject to various planning conditions, and I wish to confirm this evening that the applicant is content to accept all of the proposed conditions as they are drafted. In particular, we note that proposed condition 12 relates to the periods when construction work can take place. The applicant is conscious that the site is accessed via a series of rural lanes and that care will be needed during the construction of the scheme to minimise the possible effects of traffic associated with construction. In addition to working within these time periods specified in the proposed condition, the applicant will also work carefully with contractors and suppliers to seek to ensure that the occasional effects that may arise on the access lanes will be kept to an absolute minimum. Proposed condition 13 relates to the external material finish of parts of the eastern and northern elevations of the proposed dwelling. I can confirm that the applicant is fully accepting of this condition and that the scheme can easily incorporate this change to the materials proposed without any additional effects on the building. In conclusion then, the proposal is for the redevelopment of a new dwelling on the site of an existing house. The scheme replaces, on a one-for-one basis, an aged and problematic existing building with a new, architecturally designed, high-quality home that reflects the style, nature and material finishes of buildings in the area. In addition, it is a highly energy efficient proposal that is designed to have a low carbon footprint. The permitted usage of the site will not be intensified by the proposals, and they meet all of the criteria that has been set in the local plan for the redevelopment of houses in the open countryside. The scheme has been subject to extensive discussions with the planning authority previously, such that this application addresses the concerns they raised, and in our view, as a result, has further enhanced the quality and appropriateness of the design. The current buildings on the site, amended as they have been, do not present an attractive facade and would not meet the requirements for modern living should they be returned to a much earlier arrangement. The balance of social, economic and environmental effects and benefits should be considered in the determination of any planning application. The scheme makes a modest social contribution to the improvement of housing stock in the district and the local area, and it's unlikely to create any appreciable environmental impacts based on the evidence available, and especially in the light of the proposed planning conditions, which are wholly acceptable. The proposal has been shown to meet all of the criteria set by the local plan, for the replacement of houses in the open countryside in this part of the district. And so we agree with the planning officer that the planning balance should be in favour of approval of the scheme as now presented. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right, anyway, Sarah.
Right, we visited the site yesterday and we sort of walked up the front track and then walked around the back and sort of viewed and looked up the bank at it. I pointed out the footpaths. There was a footpath to the rear of the dwelling, Kirk Ireton, footpath 18, that's to the west of the dwelling, so at the back. And then Biggin footpath is much further away. Biggin footpath 15 is to the east. Obviously, the main considerations in this case are whether the proposal complies with the replacement dwelling policy. And it's really the two criteria, these have to be met. So we need to look at whether the existing dwelling does not make a positive contribution to the landscape character or distinctiveness such that it should be retained. And then obviously in terms of the new build, the scale, form, design and massing of the replacement dwelling does not detract from the character or appearance of its setting or surroundings. Now, negotiations, obviously there was a previously withdrawn application. Negotiations with officers have taken place since. That application was withdrawn. So we focused on the impact of the landscape, which was informed by drone imagery, which is one image is in front of you there, basically showing the existing property and the new property next to each other to make a comparison on impacts on the countryside and the landscape. The original farmhouse is dominated by inappropriate extensions, which have ultimately caused the structure significant damage. And it's set into the bank, and any public views are overwhelmed by the extensions, and it's on this basis that it's not considered to make a positive contribution to the landscape character. In terms of the existing, the replacement dwelling, obviously we've been informed by these images, and it's felt that the proposed dwelling is considered to be in context with the neighbouring properties on the hillside and in its landscape setting. Happy to take any questions.
Right, members, over to you. Councillor Burfoot.
I'll ask a couple to start off. Can we know how long this property's been, dare I say, in the condition that it is now, this existing property? And do we know whether the applicant considered renovation of certainly the farmhouse, not the outbuildings? And was this ever suggested to him in the pre-planning advice that I assume he had?
In terms of the condition of the property and how long that's been, all I can judge it from is that extension has been there since the 1980s and it's never been fully completed. It's structurally unsound and it's got props within it. In terms of the earlier discussions in pre-app, we obviously quite early on took the view that it didn't make a positive contribution for a number of reasons. It's heavily extended, and in the pre-app we advised a structural survey to be completed to give us more evidence about its structural integrity.
Okay. Any more questions, members? Councillor Purdy.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Sarah. Just bear with me while I fire up my iPad again. It's gone to sleep. So, policy HC7, Sarah. I'm embarrassed because I always normally go on site visits, but I'm afraid I couldn't make it for reasons this time. So, I'm not au fait with this site and this building, so you'll have to bear with me. But looking at the drawings and the plans, I have to question HC7 at E. The scale, form, design and massing of the replacement dwelling does not detract from the character or appearance of its setting or surroundings. That must surely be a subjective view, and I hear what the speakers have spoke very well in opposition to this, but I also take into account a comment by Barry Joyce, who was a well-known historical heritage gentleman who was the inspiration for bringing the UNESCO World Heritage Site to this valley. So I think he has some credibility there. Myself, looking at the photographs, I have to say it doesn't appear to have much architectural merit at all. But I do need to question that E. Are we satisfied that the mass of this new build is not going to be objectionable to policy HC7?
Obviously, in the previous scheme, we were concerned about its south elevation and how that sits into the hillside, which is why they provided evidence in terms of drone imagery, because it is read in context with a section 79 dwelling that sits further up the hill, and the scale of that. We had to take into account that. You can see that at the top of the screen. We had to take that into account because that does sit in its landscape setting with it. And, you know, obviously views to the site from surrounding areas. Obviously you've got the footpath running to the back, which is at quite a short distance away. But other than that, you're seeing it on the other side of the valley. Anything in between is not completely screened by the low-level woodland at the bottom of in the brook, but it is to a certain degree. So it's all about where's it seen from in terms of the landscape. We've obviously looked at footpaths. We've looked at you know, what is around it, and that's the judgment we've made in terms of how it fits within that landscape and context.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Louise.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. If we was mindful to approve this application, could we put another condition in to say we could use anti-glare glass on the windows to hopefully sort some of the problems out with the glare situation from the glass?
Yep, I think that's a perfectly reasonable condition.
Thank you.
Councillor Slack.
Thank you, Chair. Like Councillor Purdy, I'm sorry I wasn't able to make the site visit yesterday. But I've read extensively the report, and I've listened to all the speakers, and I've read Barry Joyce's contribution. And I do find that this seems to be a bigger footprint. To me, it seems a massive thing, really, to what there was there originally. And going back to 1700s, it's a shame for a historical building like this has never been listed, really. It ought to have been listed, but it apparently hasn't. But it's a building, buildings like this, we don't want to lose. It's part of our heritage, really. So I think, same as a lot of speakers have said, it could be restored. Yes, it costs a lot of money to be restored, but it could be restored and improved. And in extensions, what to put onto it could be in keeping with the property as it is like. So I'm a little bit, how can I say, disappointed really that this gigantic property has been dropped there in the countryside. It's not, character appearance to me is not right really in that area. So thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Slack. Anybody else wishing to ask a question? No? In which case I'll move into debate. You want to ask a question, do you, Councillor O'Brien? Okay. Councillor O'Brien then.
Thank you, Chair. I think the first four speakers articulated very, very well why this development is inappropriate in this location, and why I think we should on this occasion go against our officer's recommendation. I think I'd summarise it in the reasons in through 4 points. And I accept that people will say that design is always a subjective issue. Well, it is, but there are certain characteristics of good and not so good design which I think you can follow. And I think I want to draw these out in this case. Firstly, I think we have a planning policy, a very good planning policy, which says development should make a positive contribution to the local landscape and the local environment. Not that it's acceptable, but that it makes a positive contribution. And I haven't seen anything which shows to me the positive contribution that this development makes. I accept that it makes a positive contribution towards our climate change agenda. That to me is not a substitute to making a contribution in design terms. They're not alternatives. It's both of them we look for. Secondly, we look to see a new development reflect the characteristics of the local area and draw inspiration from the local area. This is the sort of development I think is more appropriate for somewhere in the home counties. I don't think it reflects the characteristics of the Derbyshire Dales. I've tried to see if it does, but I can see nothing in the architectural form which tells me in any way reflects what we see as typical development in our area. And a new development should draw inspiration from its location. It can get that inspiration from the use of the land, as the original building does, as a farmhouse. It could get inspiration from people of the cloth. It could get inspiration from the landed gentry. It could get inspiration from the local industry. Now, this development doesn't appear to me to do any of those. It gets its inspiration from someone who wants to live in a big house in the country. And the other point is that landscaping is about integrating development into the environment. In this case, the landscaping appears to be there purely to hide the development. I think that is a wrong approach. If a development requires landscaping to shield it so that it can't be seen, that tells you something about the development itself. Development doesn't need to be hidden to be shielded. It should stand on its own and be an asset. And on the issue relating to whether it's structurally feasible to rebuild the existing farmhouse, it's difficult for us, I think, as a committee to argue that directly. What I would say is that normally you'd expect when you buy a property in this condition, the purchase price reflects the cost of renovation and redevelopment. So I will leave it at that. But I would like at this stage, Chair, to move a refusal of the application for the reasons I've set out. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much.
I'm happy to second that, Chair.
Do you want to speak now? Or?
Do, yeah.
Okay.
I couldn't have put it better myself, Councillor O'Brien. I absolutely agree with everything you've said. Obviously, this proposed dwelling certainly would make a statement. That's definitely true by virtue of its design and scale. But do we want it to make that sort of statement in this area? My view is definitely not. I think one of the speakers mentioned Beverly Hills, and I absolutely go along with that. I think it's inappropriate for its surroundings. The agent talked about a one-for-one replacement. It's clearly not that. I do welcome, as Councillor O'Brien said, the low carbon footprint. That's to be praised, but it's too big, it's too dominant, and it's out of character with its surroundings. So for that reason, I was happy to second the motion. Thank you.
Councillor Buttle.
you'll be surprised to hear that I actually agree with the previous two speakers. It is just a little bit too large. There was the old people's home on the edge of Ashbourne, which was dominating. And we decided we'd like to take a story off it. And they came back with another plan, which was a story shorter. And we said, fine. I'd like to give the applicant the opportunity to do that. So I'm quite happy to tick the refuse box. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Fitzherbert.
Thank you. Members, we need a valid reason to deny this application after what the officers have put in their report. As the heritage champion, you'd be interested. I read with interest the building condition report that says it's completely uninhabitable, structurally compromised, and completely derelict. I accept that's the core farmhouse. So, sorry, something else got there. I think it was Neil. Your machine's on. And having myself tried to rebuild completely derelict things, as Councillor O'Brien has mentioned, it's a labour of love, really. And if the building condition report says that, then I think obviously that's got to go. I don't see how, unless you've got stacks of money, how you can actually reconfigure it for modern living, especially with the eco aspects that this council and many other councils want to do about that. So, therefore, if the building is under threat and to be demolished, what do you replace it with? So you replace it, as Councillor O'Brien says, with something that is may not be the taste of everybody in this room, may not be my taste, it may not be anybody. To agree on the taste of that is not part of our remit. And I think obviously something's got to be done here. The applicants have spent a lot of time and liaison with the officers dealing with this, and sometimes the officer takes a view, and the view of the officer this time is acceptable. I'm trying to still figure out, despite Councillor O'Brien's beautifully worded sentences, how we can deny this this application. We're going to have to allow something at some stage. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I've got nobody down my list. So, Councillor Purdy, do you want to speak first?
Yes, thanks, Chair. I think Councillor Fitzherbert hit the nail on the head. It's to find material reason for refusal. And I agree, whilst we might not like the building, it may well be a building that actually grows on people, because there are many historical records of where buildings have gone up and they're particularly hated by people, and then they grow to love them. So I don't know. We're certainly not able in this committee, we have not got the remit to instruct the owner developer to demolish that house or do anything with it. I think what we have to take into account is where we see this new build fitting into the scene. And I think we have to accept sometimes that contemporary can be of benefit to an area. It doesn't have to always follow the vernacular. So on the basis that I can find no real good reason for refusal, I will go with officer's recommendation for approval.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Purdy. So what I've got on the table, it was moved and seconded by Councillor Burfoot for refusal. So on that basis and what's on the table, so all those in favour of refusal, please show. All those against, please show. So that's failed. So now what I need is somebody to put something on the table. Councillor Louise.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I was on the site visit yesterday. We walked the whole of the distance around the existing property. We've shown where the new property is going, sort of sat into the bank side. To be fair, I don't think the slide that we've got on the screen does it much justice at the moment, because when we walked around yesterday, all you could see was trees. You couldn't see no other properties that was really in your face, if you like, towards looking over it. And I think, like we said, it's had a structural engineer's report on it, and looking around it, you can see it crumbling away. So I'm in favour of the officer's recommendation, subject to the glass being altered for anti-glare glass.
So you're happy to move it for
I'll
approval?
move the application as written by the officers.
Okay.
Thank you.
Councillor Wakeman?
Yes, Chair, I'll second that motion, please.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Buttle?
Sorry, can we check that the anti-reflective glass has been conditioned into this final? Yeah.
Yep.
Thank
Yep.
you.
Well, I think that was the suggestion from Councillor Louise that anti-reflective glass be used. So anyway, on that basis, it's now been moved and seconded for approval. All those in favour, please show. All those against? And any abstentions? So it's been approved as with the additional condition. Anyway, thank you very much. So we move back now to 5.1, which is John Smedley's. Excuse me. Excuse me. Excuse me, I'd like to get on with the committee, thank you. So anyway, item 5.1, which is John Smedley's Limited, Lee Mills, Lee Road, Lee Bridge, Derbyshire. There's some late representation on this, so I'll give you a minute to read through it before we move on. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, you ready? Okay, thank you very much. First speaker on this is Ms. Teresa Hitchcock, local resident, to speak against the application. You have 3 minutes, and I'll let you know when you have 30 seconds left.
The heritage impact assessment produced by the Durham Heritage Site Partnership was based on the evidence report commissioned by the applicant. In particular, section 66 and 72 of the planning listed Building and Conservation Act 1990. I think it's important to point out the reason for this application, despite Evans' Victorian indication.
Can you turn your microphone on, please?
Of course. Do you want me to go through it again?
No, it's quite all right.
Okay. Despite Evans Vittori indicating on page 33 of its report that, quote, the client, and my emphasis client, feels that the current system is outdated and no longer economically viable for the factory and the safety of its employees, end quote, this application is not about life safety or mandatory application of fire regulations. As stated on page 36 of the Vittori report, to quote, this change is necessary due to the insurance requirements of the factory, end quote. At page 48, quote, change ensures the survival of John Smedley factory sites through making the insurance of the fire strategy economically viable, end quote. It seems that the company, quite understandably, I would submit, wants to reduce its expenditure in relation to the annual clean of the lagoon and the cost of its insurance cover. There is no evidence provided to suggest that the site is under a mandatory obligation to provide fire strategy for the protection of life, and indeed it would be strange if this were, given the lack of complexity in the mill buildings. So it seems the applicant is spending money to save money, which makes the cost-benefit analysis extremely difficult to apply to such a sensitive site in the absence of more detail relating to the options available. At page 33 of the Vittori report, the following statements are made giving prominence to the importance of alternative schemes. Quote, as part of the project process during the early stages, alternative placement and strategy options were reviewed with the client. The fire strategy subcontractor, Taylor Fire Sprinklers, and the client concluded that this was the best scheme for the site, end quote. And quote, the scheme at this stage has considered several different strategies for installing the equipment required and therefore addressing the economic viability of the sprinkler system in balance of the benefits or harm to the heritage assets in question. I quote that. Those other alternatives need to be explained and justification given as to why they were not acceptable and why the proposed scheme set out in the application was chosen.
30 seconds left.
Given its impact on the World Heritage Site, we have identified other schemes. You will now be aware that there are a number of inaccuracies and omissions in the documents relating to this application. You are now being asked to consider this with inaccurate information before you. You are aware of the risks associated with making planning decisions by reference to actual and or potentially incomplete and inaccurate information. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next on my list is Mr. Dan Greenway, agent, to speak in favour of the application. You have 5 minutes, and I'll let you know when you have 30 seconds left.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Dan Greenway. I'm a director at Evans Vittori Architects. We are a Matlock-based practice, proud of our track record in creating award-winning projects on our doorstep. We were awarded the 2022 RIBA Architect of the Year for the East Midlands region. We are invited members of the East Midlands Regional Design Review Panel and the Derwent Valley Mills World Heritage Site Conservation and Planning Group. We are fortunate to witness John Smedley still in production after 238 years. The factory, which supports the livelihoods of 300 local families, stands today as a collection of buildings that grew over many years and has developed alongside the ever-evolving requirements of the company and should continue to do so as the company rises to meet the challenges of recurrent modernisation. The John Smedley factory is recognised as an attribute of local significance. The Dethick, Lee and Holloway neighbourhood plan states, world-renowned designers and manufacturers of fine knitwear, and holds a royal warrant for those products. The company is the only mill in the World Heritage Site which is still operated for its original purpose. The historic significance and continued operation of John Smedley as a working mill is highly valued by the local community. Furthermore, the factory is acknowledged as an attribute of international significance. The Derwent Valley Mills World Heritage Site Management Plan states, as Objective 3.4, to support John Smedley to ensure the continuation of the Lee Mill site as a working textile factory and visitor destination. Our appointment by John Smedley to assist with modernisation of the site-wide fire strategy. Currently, the sprinkler system is fed by the historic mill pond. As a consequence, the mill pond requires annual maintenance in the form of dredging and disposal of mud from the bottom of the pond. Over time, this process has become increasingly difficult to manage as the requirements of the Environment Agency and the company's insurers become increasingly onerous. The planning application to install water tanks and a connected pump house would relieve these operational issues, satisfy the Environment Agency and the insurer's most stringent requirements, and help to make the company more sustainable as a business. It would also preserve and enhance the ecological value of the mill pond, allowing pond life to thrive, a benefit that is a priority of Ian McLean, the Managing Director. Regarding the safety of traffic passing along the lane beside the site, in the past 30 years there have been no reported accidents relating to sightlines or visibility along the private road adjacent to the proposal. No highways objections were made from the statutory consultee. Similarly, the HSE have stated they have no objections. As far back as 1963, for 55 years, similar shaped tanks occupied the exact site in question. No health and safety concerns were raised over the previous tanks. The tanks do not compromise public access along the lane. Regarding the impact of design on the local environment, the relevant statutory consultees concluded that the less than substantial harm weighed against the public benefit of the proposal warrants the approach we have put forward, and that it is acceptable in planning terms. The planning officer has given a recommendation for approval. As stated in the Heritage Impact Assessment and reiterated in the Planning Office report, the proposed scheme does not negatively impact on the World Heritage Site and the associated heritage assets, reuse of an existing tank enclosure with no impact on site archaeology, designed to hold the minimum water content needed, tank size and placement considers future inspection and maintenance requirements, has been proposed with painting the tanks as a dark recessive colour to camouflage against the woodland backdrop. The approach to the project we have detailed above has been supported by planning officers, the Conservation Officer and Derwent Valley Mills World Heritage Site. It is my view that we should do whatever we can to help the longest surviving and only remaining operating mill factory within the Derwent Valley Mills World Heritage Site. This project is well engineered and sensitively designed, with key decisions conditioned by the planning officer. Will help to keep the company healthy and safeguard the jobs of 300 families whose livelihood depend on it at this difficult time. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you very much. Okay, Sarah.
I'd just like to draw your attention to the fact that obviously in this, in the assessment of this application, both the Conservation Officer and the Derwent Valley Mills World Heritage Site Coordinator have been involved. And in section 5.9, there's also an addendum. So we've had two responses from the World Heritage Site Coordinator on this scheme. In terms of how we assess the application, we need to look at the MPPF paragraph 196, which requires where a development proposal will lead to less than substantial harm to the significance of a designated heritage asset, this harm should be weighted against the public benefits of the proposal. It's concluded that the proposed new tanks would only have a modest overall adverse impact on the setting of the listed buildings or the character and appearance of this part of the conservation area. This impact is considered to be counterbalanced by the public benefit that results in allowing the industrial site to evolve, thereby helping strengthen this important historical employment site. Obviously, the recommendation is as per the late representation sheet. Happy to take any questions.
All right, members, over to you. Questions. Councillor Purdy.
Chair, I need to refer to late rep on notifying the LP that a request has been submitted. Where do we stand with that, please?
Chris.
Thank you, Councillor Purdy. You'll note from the late representation sheet that there has been a request from multiple sources for this application to be called in by the Secretary of State. The Secretary of State have contacted me to basically say that the authority is safe to issue to make a recommendation on this application on the basis that authority be delegated to officers to approve the application subject to conditions on the basis that the Secretary of State do not decide to call this application in. So the resolution or the recommendation before you this evening is for delegated authority to be given to the development manager or principal planning officer to be able to issue this decision on the basis that the Secretary of State doesn't call this application in by the end of week commencing the 18th of July.
Thanks for that clarification. Chair, if you can come back to me for debate.
Yeah, of course I will, yeah. Councillor O'Brien.
Just two more procedural questions, Chair. Can you tell me why there isn't a listed building consent application? First question. And my second question is on the proposed new recommendation. As far as I understand it, normally in these circumstances, a recommendation is that the authority is minded to approve the application subject to the application not being called in by the Secretary of State, rather than, in fact, delegating authority to the development manager, because technically the recommendation you have here would mean there would be no debate at committee. We're simply delegating the authority to approve the application, which is not, I think, what we want to achieve. So would it not be better to say the recommendation is to minded to approve subject to it not being called in?
Okay, so what I'm going to do is ask our solicitor to answer your second question first, and then Chris or Sarah will answer your other question.
Councillor O'Brien, with regards to the debate, I think what the suggestion is that we go through the normal motions of questions and debate now, and for you to make the recommendation to, whatever the council decides, subject to the Secretary of State's decision as to whether they call in this application. So the debate is going to happen tonight, if that's what the council so wishes, which I think is what you were worried about, not going through the normal debate procedure.
Is this recommendation intended to replace the existing ones, or is it an additional one?
Yes, this is intended to replace the original recommendation. And if this application ultimately was called in by the Secretary of State, the decision would be taken out of the District Council's hands. So ultimately that decision will be made by that higher power in this particular case. If they don't decide to call this application in, then there'll be a resolution tonight for authority to be delegated to the development manager to issue a decision to approve this application subject to conditions as recommended.
Okay. Thank you very much. Any more questions?
My first question, Chair.
John Smedley's factory is not a listed building. There are listed buildings near to it in terms of some cottages, but it isn't a listed building.
Do you not think it affects the setting of those listed buildings?
Councillor Bryan, we've received this application from the applicant on the basis that they consider and the authority considers only full planning permission to be required. We've considered the provisions of the Listed Building Act previously in terms of what that controls, and we don't feel that this particular application affects the listed building to the extent of requiring a listed building consent application.
Okay. Councillor.
So if it's not a listed building then, Chris. So has it ever been put forward to be a listed building? Because it's really historical building, isn't it, really?
Because of the significance of the building, it's protected to some degree by the World Heritage Site, but members of the public, anyone can put forward a building for listing.
Yeah, it's in the Heritage Site.
But it's of significance in terms of its contribution to the industrial heritage of the locality. It's recognised by being within an important component of the World Heritage Site. And there's also listed buildings within the grounds of the industrial buildings on site. So there is that degree of protection already. These buildings will have been assessed in terms of their contribution to the history of the site and the area, but concluded not to be of sufficient quality to warrant listing. But it doesn't mean that can't be reviewed in the future. That's the current position.
So really, it's probably got less protection then, not being a listed building. Really,
it's still
just in World Heritage Site, but if it had been a listed building, it'd have more protection.
By virtue of its importance to the World Heritage Site, it is afforded significant protection in terms of being a designated heritage asset in planning policy terms.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay.
Neil, did you want to?
I do, thank you, Chair. What really caught my eye about this one was the mill pond. Are we going to be allowing it to silt up, or are they going to be allowing it to silt up? Because we don't really want that. We want it to be a sort of local biodiversity. Is this going to be, if they will, okay, I'll start again. I'll try and be more sensible. If there's a mill pond, would they be allowed to just let it lapse and turn into just a mess? Or what? You know, like if they no longer need a mill pond, do we actually have any standing on keeping an eye on mill ponds in the longer term as part of the heritage asset? If you see what I mean.
I seem to remember that the agent actually said that it would become a biodiversity area. So I just remember him saying that. So, yeah.
Yeah, I definitely heard that as well. I was just wondering whether or not we can hold them to it.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Buttle. I think it was clear from the agent's presentation to members that's their intention. I think if members felt that was an important consideration, that it would be reasonable to include and informative to strongly encourage that as part of any decision that we make or any resolution that's made this evening.
I'd very much like us to do that if that's possible, please.
Okay, thank you very much. There's nobody down else on my list for questions. So, Councillor Purdy.
I seem to go around the houses again. Thanks, Chair. This is in my ward, and the reason that we've got the UNESCO listing and World Heritage Site is the very fact of this building. I mean, it's been nice to see it listed, certainly, but it's the very fact that it's there, as are the other mills. And we've recently had a threat to our UNESCO World Listing, and I've had meetings with Pauline Latham and other ministers because of the concern over the Belper mill, but that's by the by. It's absolutely vital that we keep this only mill going, and I'm sure that the applicant and the owners of the mill have included very professional people in making a judgment on these water tanks. I heard the applicant say that he would make the pond biodiversity, and I accept that on his word, and I'm sure that will happen. I have every faith in these people. I've been to see them before. So, Chair, I'm happy to move the officer's recommendation for approval.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Fitzherbert.
Thank you. We're trying to preserve historic buildings and settings. I think we all agree with that. But sometimes, members, when new regulations come out, and there's drafts of them come out from government, as you all know, we need to perhaps put in structures that are perhaps less familiar with the surroundings to various properties. And sometimes, you know, they're ones that we'd rather not do, but we have to do. Think of all the fire alarms on the sides of listed buildings just in this street in Matlock and the heritage area just down the road in Matlock. Because we have a duty to preserve these properties and these buildings. And although I accept the Speaker's eloquent concerns, I do think the applicant has looked at all the various options. You know, after all, they employ 300 people, so they've got to be, have been around 240 years, so that's a pretty good track record. And the other thing about this is this was meant to have been determined in March, if you look at the report. That's 4 months ago. I think we have a responsibility to this firm in our area, let's put not necessarily our district, although this application is in our district, and therefore I'm more than happy to second the recommendation for approval.
Thank you very much, Councillor Fitzherbert. Councillor Donnelly.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Well, I was one of those that went on the regional visit, and yeah, my thoughts really are, I was quite happy to second it. I think that the system now we're putting in is a vast improvement in the present system, so I think I'm quite happy to support it.
Okay, thank you very much. Anybody else wishing to speak in debate? No? It's been moved and seconded. As set out, authority to be delegated to the development manager to approve the application, subject to conditions following confirmation with the Secretary of State that they do not wish to call in the application in for consideration by the end of the week commencing the 18th of July 2022. All those in favour, please show. I'm not going to ask for against because the decision is unanimous, so it's been passed. Thank you very much. Right, moving swiftly on. Item 5.2, which has come back. This is formation of vernacular access and parking at 42 Smedley Street, Matlock, Derbyshire, D42FQ. I have one speaker on this, Mr. Andrew Turner, who's the applicant, who's sat there. You have 5 minutes, and I'll let you know when there's 30 seconds left. Yep. If you'd just like to turn the microphone on. That's it.
Good start.
No, don't worry about it.
Try again. Good evening. Thank you, Chair. I would like to start by taking the opportunity of thanking the Planning Committee for deferring my application at the May planning meeting and taking the time to visit number 42 and engage in conversation with me. That has been very rare in this soulless process. I did not take this vote as any sort of victory, but viewed it as an opportunity to hopefully liaise with the Highways Department and try and find some common ground we could agree on. But sadly, I was not given this opportunity. After the May meeting, I was unsure how to progress my revised application. So after a week or so of hearing nothing, I phoned to speak with the case officer to gain some advice. He was off-site, but I was told he would be given the message to get back to me. This did not happen. So at this point, I spoke to Councillor Steve Wade, and he said he would ring on my behalf for information and let me know what procedure to follow. I don't understand why the applicant is not front and centre in the process. Councillor Wayne spoke with Mr. Eccleston, and he later advised me to get new plans drawn up and send with a covering letter to the Planning and Highways Department. He also said to state that he was more than willing to be present at the site visit to discuss my proposal with them. So I sent all the information and waited for some sort of response. Nothing was forthcoming until I received the standard email notification to say that the highways report would be on the planning portal shortly. This appeared in the next couple of days, which I read with total dismay. All the positives I had stated about using the pre-existing drop curb area to access the proposed hard standings had somehow been turned into negatives. They had clearly not understood how using this area significantly increased the westerly visibility, which was the issue, and I totally refute their visibility measurements. As even being quite conservative, the line of sight increases to circa 40 metres using this area. I find it really quite insulting. As a long-standing resident of Matlet, no one in the highways has taken the time to engage with me on this application. And to add insult to injury, they have now added that the area is not even big enough to accommodate vehicle movements. This despite me increasing the area to circa 50 square metres, which is over 150 square feet in old money. Having read the Highways and Planning Department's report, I felt, to use a medical analogy, my application had gone from being in intensive care back in May to now on life support in July. I felt totally beaten. But I thought I'd have my 5 minutes as I've come this far. My motivation for this application has never been about making number 42 more desirable, giving it off-street parking and looking to sell for a profit, as I want to keep it in the family. And the sad passing of my wife's mother in November has given me the opportunity to offer the property for my son to live in. He is a retained firefighter and as such needs to live within a 5-minute response time of the fire station. I also was looking to have a charging facility for a future EV vehicle. But parking is the issue with this partner, which I totally get. As with a new baby, it is just not practical option to not have off-street parking. So this is what prompted my application. Little did I know what a roller coaster ride of stress and anxiety I was signing up to. I know this is not relevant to your decision, but planning decisions do affect lives. And if I thought for 1 second what I was proposing was dangerous for my new grandchild or any other member of the public, I would not be wasting mine or your time with this application. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you very much. So, Chris, you could take this one.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just a couple of points to come back on there. Members will recall previously visiting this site to consider the impacts of a new vehicular access and parking area in this locality and its impact on highway safety in particular. At the site visit, the applicant made reference to a plan which proposed to utilise the front garden area of 42 Smedley Street, but also an existing crossing point which is adjacent to the property. Now that scenario has been presented to the local highway authority and they've commented on that proposal in detail. They do recognise that emerging visibility will be improved, but not to a sufficient level to be able to sanction it from a highway safety perspective. And they've also, just to clarify one of the comments that were made, they have what they've said is that they do dispute that manoeuvring within the space is possible. And what they're saying is it wouldn't be readily achievable without the driver having to make numerous adjustments. And what they're saying there is that the space is limited and therefore it's going to be some manoeuvre to enter that site in a forward gear and exit it in a forward gear without having to make a significant number of adjustments. And in reality, what they're saying is not practical to think that someone will enter and exit the site in a forward gear, and obviously they wouldn't be able to police that. Hence why they're recommending refusal, and they sustain their recommendation of refusal on, or recommendation to refuse this application on highway safety grounds. Happy to take questions at this stage.
Members, questions? Peter.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. Yeah, we all understand highways. They it's a shame they never attend meetings, one of the highways officers really, to explain. And they are difficult to get hold to. I've dealings with them myself, and they are difficult. I do sympathise really for the gentleman. It's really difficult, really. A similar thing up Starcombs recently, where the lady wanted a turnaround and they refused that. But I think this is a bit better than that, actually. I think this visibility is not too bad, but that's my opinion. Highways have got their opinion, and we can't do too much about it, can we, really? So it's a shame, really. That's all. Thanks.
Anybody else wanted to ask questions? Councillor Lees.
Thank you, Chair. Could we confirm as to whether or not the highways have actually been on site, or have they done a desktop exercise? Have they actually been out on site now and looked? Because that was one of the questions at the previous meeting when we went on site. It was going to inform the highways to come out and actually physically have a look rather than do a desktop exercise. Have they done that?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Lees. My understanding is the Highway Authority have looked at this in detail, which has involved a visit to site and to consider the likely or the amount of emerging visibility onto the highway that's achievable in this case.
Okay. Any more questions? So now move into debate. Councillor Purdy.
Well, first of all, Mr. Turner, I'm sorry to hear about your experience, but the fact is that all local authorities are suffering a great capacity issue with officers, and highways, I know, are short of staff, quite drastically short of staff. So I can't speak on their behalf, but I do know they're extremely busy, and perhaps they haven't got the luxury of visiting each customer. So that's all I can say on that. We do have to go. Normally, we say that the word of the highways officer is Bible, and therefore, if we go against highways recommendations, basically what we're doing is going against the recommendations on highway safety. So if subsequently there is an accident, then it could fall back on this committee or that officer. So 99.9 times out of 100, we do follow highways recommendations. So I'm sorry you're up against that. So I go with the officer's recommendations for future.
So you're happy to move it, Councillor Purdy? Does that find a seconder? Councillor Donnelly.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yes, I was on the first visit to the gentleman's residence as well, and it was quite. I thought that we could sort of come to some compromise with the area and everything else. But then again, when highways say no, it means no, I think. So unfortunately, I'll have to go with how it is, and that's I shall second that.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Donnelly. Councillor Councillor Burfoot. Sorry, Sue.
All right, thank you.
I've got it down as SB, you see, so you're the same.
No, that's fine. Can I say, first of all, that without giving the highways officer any inclination as to what my view was on this application, I did check that they visited the site. They've assured me that they did. It is unfortunate that, for whatever reason, they weren't able to meet anybody on site, but they've assured me that they did go. I've got every sympathy for this applicant in that, he wants to do the right thing. He wants to get a car off the road. He wants to have an EV point, and getting the car off the road is really quite crucial in that area. I think we should not underestimate the problems that people have parking on Smedley Street, and in fact in the whole of the bank area. I noticed that the county council say that vehicles travelling at 30 miles an hour have a stopping sight distance of 43 metres. It would be. I'm a huge supporter of 20-mile-an-hour zones, and I wonder. It would be interesting to know if vehicles are travelling at 20 miles an hour, what the stopping sight distance would be. I also noticed that in the notes to applicant that he could commission a speed survey. I don't know whether he'd want to do that because, it's been a traumatic application for him, this. But at the end of the day, to go against a very detailed objection from Highways is really difficult for a planning committee. Really difficult. I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Burford. I nearly called you Councillor Bull again. Anybody else wishing to speak in debate? No? Oh, Councillor Fitzherbert, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, if you recall, we did go and sort out the one at Ashbourne, you know, below the bypass near Councillor Donnelly's ward, didn't we? That access, but it was and I think that was a bit of a victory for us, the district, and common sense. But I don't know quite how I'm going to vote tonight.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Fitzherbert. So there's nobody else down on my list, so it's been moved and seconded as set out on the report. Planning permission be refused. All those in favour, please show. All those against? And no abstentions, so very sorry, it's been refused. Anyway, thank you very much, members. So, being as it's a nice hot day, I'm going to do a recess and we'll convene again at past. So, everybody can have a nice comfort break and go and fill your water up and whatever. So, I'll reconvene the meeting at 7:30. Okay, so moving swiftly on. This is one of 3 applications at Farmer's Garage. So we'll start with the first, which is application number 21/01246 out. Outline plan application for erection of 2 dwellings with approval being sought for scale and layout. There's no late reps on it. We have 2 speakers. So the first speaker on this, Mr. Stephen Brown, local resident, speaking against the application. Sorry, it's Kerry listening to it on YouTube. Mr. Stephen Brown, if you'd like to take the seat, you have 3 minutes, and I'll let you know when you have 30 seconds left.
Thank you, Chair. Is it possible for my comments for all these 3 applications to be considered?
If you want to do them now, yes.
Yeah, because I'd said when I called in that...
That's quite all right.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So I believe the development is not proportionate to Smedley Street, to the adjacent sort of domestic dwellings. It may be proportionate to adjacent commercial dwellings, but not to the domestic ones. It also concerns me, we've already talked about parking tonight. Parking on Smedley Street is ridiculous. Application 246 indicates that there's 2 parking spaces. However, a family dwelling, if you're only having 2 cars, I don't see how that adds up. Most family dwellings have significantly more cars than 1 per household. And in order to have the visibility display of that development as well, it takes out 3 spaces that are already on Smedley Street, along with 2 telegraph poles. So I don't see how that maintains safety for that area. The development, the 5 dwelling houses, I think it is, have no parking considerations, yet they're referred to as family dwellings. And like I said before, I can only see that as the introduction of potentially up to 20 cars on what is already a very busy Smedley Street locality. I'm concerned, like I say, the height of those buildings is only proportionate to the commercial development. I'm also concerned about the orientation of the buildings and the overlooking of adjacent properties, and I think consideration needs to be given to that as well. I have a further concern, which I would expect if this is approved will be picked up under development around the actual stability of the land. It's a formal, one of the sites is a former petrol station. There's been no environmental considerations since that ceased to be a petrol station. We understand that the petrol tanks are still buried beneath that. There's also concerns around the retaining of the properties above where the proposed development is. I did have a further point. I should have written it down. So, how long have I got, Chair?
You've got 50 seconds.
Okay.
If you think about it and you want to speak further on when we
Thank you,
move
Chair.
to another,
It was right there. I got on a roll about something else, and it was the green space. So we're proposing a number of dwelling houses, and there's no green space that I could see on the outline plans for those houses. So if we're suggesting that we're going to develop properties for families with no access to green space, that just seems crazy in my mind. That's all I wish to say, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Like I said, if there's anything you haven't covered, I'm quite prepared to let you speak on the other 2 applications if you want to.
If it comes to mind, Chair, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Just stick your hand up so I know.
Thank you.
Okay, the next on my list is Mr. Jamie Foot, the agent, speaking in favour of the application. You have 5 minutes and I'll let you know when there's 30 seconds left.
Thank you, Chair, for the opportunity to speak this evening. Just going through the comments on the first application.
Yeah.
Sorry, apologies. Just go through the comments on the first application. We've obviously reviewed the objections to it, and we've gone through all the different aspects of it. We have put in a alternative scheme to the case officer who's been dealing with it, and I welcome the officer's recommendation for approval on this site. What we want to do is show the committee here tonight and the council that what is deliverable across these sites is residential development that is going to fall within the town centre. You know, we're at the top of the settlement hierarchy. We are looking for more family accommodation within the town centre. These are smaller sites. they would be commensurate with other development and other residential units across, this type of location. In terms of parking and parking provision, we've indicated on those plans what could be delivered, but again, it's not here for a consideration before you. Now, what we did want to do is highlight to the case officer and the council that we could deliver parking provision on site, and we have no highways objections to that. Let me just have a quick brief look through. Again, I'm going to not go on for 5 minutes about each site. I'm sure you don't want to sit here any longer than you have to. Obviously, each one does have its individual merits, and we'll concentrate on those per site. Again, with this, we located to 2 dwellings, which we feel is of appropriate scale and setting. Again, you don't have details in terms of fenestration, architectural detailing. We've given you some indication and encouragement of what would be acceptable, and we've certainly moved away from the initial scheme that was put before the council. That is on that basis. I'd like to close my comments on this application. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Chris, are you doing this?
Yes, Chair. Thank you, Chair. I'll just address the comments that are relevant to the assessment of this particular application. Just to clarify to members that this evening we're just considering the layout and the scale of the proposed developments and also the amount. Officers feel that 2 dwellings on this particular site would make full and effective use of the site. We are, like the initial or the first speaker, concerned, or we had some concerns about the potential impact of any development on the residential amenity of the occupants of number 1 Malvern's Gardens that you can just see on the presentation currently. You'll know, members will have noted from visiting the site yesterday, there is a significant difference in levels, and we are satisfied based on the maximum eaves and ridge height that's shown on that particular plan that a form of development can be achieved without having or resulting in any unacceptable overbearing or overshadowing effects on the occupants of that neighbouring dwelling. Appearance is a matter for subsequent approval. Appearance can include built form. We are in a conservation area here. It's Matlock Bank Conservation Area, so we do need to think carefully about the design and the built form of any buildings on this particular site. But we're satisfied with the scale parameters that we've set by condition that we can achieve a form of development that does respond positively and conserve this part of the conservation area, but also protect the residential amenity of the occupants of adjacent dwellings. Happy to take questions at this stage.
Members, questions? Councillor Burfoot.
Thank you, Chair. We've had raised the issue of vehicular access onto Malvern Gardens. I think at some point that was raised. This vehicle parking space, will it, as it stands at the moment, does that mean that they will be reversing onto the really steep Malvern Gardens? And there's also, I brought this up at the site visit, that there is an issue, presumably a legal one, with the fact that the majority of Malvern Gardens is privately owned. So does that mean that if this was to go ahead with that parking space for that one house as it is, what happens there? Do they have to get permission from the other residents? I mean, is that something we can discuss tonight? That's one question, if I may.
Yeah, it's a tricky one, this, because access is a reserved matters, but in effect what we're doing here is we're giving permission for up to 2 dwelling houses to be constructed on the site, and we're agreeing the layout. The application as originally submitted proposed a pair of semi-detached properties on the site with access to the west of the dwelling to the most westerlymost part of that plan. And the Highway Authority raised concerns in respect of a boundary wall on that western boundary and the effect that would have, or that impeding emerging visibility onto this part of Smedley Street, and that resulted in the site layout that's before members this evening, which moves the dwelling to the west and proposes a parking space in between the properties, which provides a greater amount of emerging visibility onto the highway. So the Highway Authority are happy in principle that this layout will allow for at least one parking space to be formed, which will be acceptable to them in highway safety terms. The access that's shown onto Malvern Gardens is indicative at this stage. There's no guarantee, and I don't think members can assume that a right of access can be secured onto Malvern Gardens. That is a matter for subsequent consideration and approval by the council. But if that arrangement is considered to be unacceptable, that's a matter that we can consider it going forward as part of any approval of reserve matters application. But I think what members need to bear in mind is the location of this site. It's within a Tier 1 settlement, so a main market town in the Derbyshire Dales district. And the Highway Authority have indicated that a car-free development on the other side of the road for development of 5 houses would be acceptable in this location.
Can I come back with another couple of questions? There are two things that have been mentioned in the report, or certainly by people who've put in representations, and that one of them is how much consideration can we give or should we give to the strain on overloaded drain and sewer systems on that road, given that there have been lots and lots of bursts on that road. Severn Trent seem to be permanently there. Do we take that into consideration? And also it was mentioned about a covenant which restricted height. What can you say about that?
Yeah, a covenant on the property is a civil matter, and it depends on whoever that covenant's in favour of. Whether they would enforce that covenant. And we can only make a planning decision based on development plan and the policies within that plan. Going back to the first question, you have to remind me what it was. Oh, the sewage, yes, it's the responsibility of the water company to ensure that they accommodate any foul and surface, well, not necessarily surface water flows, there's a hierarchy for that, with the connection to a sewer being least preferable method of disposal of surface water, but they have a requirement to accommodate foul sewage and demands from new development. So if their infrastructure isn't capable of accommodating foul sewage from this development, it would be their responsibility to upgrade that infrastructure to be able to accommodate those flows, and it'd be a matter for the building regulations process rather than the planning process.
Okay, Councillor Buttle.
I've got two questions. The first is, what is it that made the decision to call this area a conservation area? Is it both sides of the street, the north side, the south side? What is it that particularly caught our eye to decide it was a conservation area? And do those two little detached houses, do they match?
Just to answer the second part of that question first, so the indicative drawing there shows the proposed dwellings to be of a similar design. But we're not considering appearance as part of this application, so all we're considering are matters of layouts, the layout of any buildings on this particular site and the scale, so the height of those buildings, depth and length of the building on site. So the detail and the appearance element and the external built form is a matter for subsequent approval. In terms of the significance of this area, the council has prepared a number of conservation area appraisals which we keep up to date and we review periodically. And I think it might be worth reading the, if you haven't already done so, the Old Bank conservation area for Matlock, which does set out the significance of the area and the importance of some of the buildings and the history of that area and the evolution of it. I think it's recognised that there's a much stronger character of development on the southern side of Smedley Street. I think the development on the northern side is more diverse. You've got Malvern Gardens, which is a relatively modern development, and the Farmer's Garage showroom and associated development again is a relatively modern intervention in the history and the evolution of this part of Matlock.
Thank you very much, Chris. I think that's reasonably clear. So when it comes to actually choosing the detail, we will be having the south side look like those nice old gritstone houses and the north side looking a bit like those 70s houses. Is that essentially what's going to happen?
I think it's difficult to speculate at this stage. There's two ways to look at it. I think you could potentially justify a more contemporary approach on the northern side, but at the same time we need to have regard to the character of existing properties in the locality, and making sure that any development is appropriate to that character and context. The narrative has to be right.
So, to be actually fairly blunt about this, it doesn't matter that it's in a conservation area, because those details don't make any difference to this application.
They are extremely important considerations, but there are considerations that we'll have to assess as part of a future application, which considers the appearance of the proposed development.
So we can put houses on it, but our decision here is based on whether this conservation area suits having 8 new houses.
We consider the effect of this development on the conservation area, which is a heritage asset, but our consideration is limited to scale and layout. When this application came in, all matters were reserved, but as officers and the local planning authority didn't consider we had enough information to be able to assess the impacts of such development on the conservation area, and that's why we asked for details of layout and scale, so that we can consider where buildings would sit, their broad scale parameters, to consider the impacts of that development on the conservation area.
So parking, if parking's not necessary on the south side, why is it necessary on the north side?
Well, you'll note from the Highway Authority's comments that it's just they've raised no objections in principle, and I think they've expressed a view, haven't they, on the 5 dwellings, that a car-free development in this location would be acceptable because of the relative ease of access to services and facilities in the town. There's no reason why that wouldn't apply, in my view, to the developments on the northern side. But 2 parking spaces have been shown, but that is just indicative. We're not considering access as part of this application.
So when we give this planning permission, assuming we do, are we giving it permission for 2 spaces on one side of the road and 1 space on the other side, and then no other spaces? So like, when we say yes, which I'm guessing we're probably going to do, is it going to be, are we giving permission for those car parking spaces or not?
No, I think, just to be clear, so we're considering the layout, so the footprint of those buildings on site. The Highway Authority have indicated the revised layout provides at least provision for 1 space in between the houses that will provide sufficient level of emerging visibility onto Smedley Street East. The access that's shown onto Malvern Gardens, comments have been made by another councillor about that being a private road. There's no guarantee that access can be achieved onto Malvern Gardens, so that's a matter that will have to be considered going forward. But I think you can safely assume that 1 space could potentially be provided to serve these 2 dwellings. But the indication is that more than 1 space will be provided. That's a matter, something to be agreed as part of a future application.
Look, for the way I always sort of think I might have an idea what it was you just said. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Buttle. Councillor O'Brien.
Just 2 questions, Chris. Can you confirm that it's normal procedure for the County Council to require that vehicles can enter and leave a development site in a forward gear? And second, there is currently a waiting restriction along that side of the street by way of a single yellow line. That, as far as I'm aware, that currently allows parking after before 8 o'clock and after 6 o'clock in the evening, and maybe at weekends. Can you confirm, therefore, that vehicles could be parked in front of this development site, other than in front of the proposed access, assuming that were granted during those hours when it's not restricted?
Yes, I think if the Highway Authority, or if permission was to be granted for a dwelling or 2 dwellings on this site with access onto Smedley Street East, a formal crossover onto the highway will have to be formed. So the restrictions that are currently in place in front of the site would need to be considered at that point. But that's an application process to the county council. So that'll be considered as part of that future application. I think we have to have regard to what the Highway Authority have said, and they've said there's no objections in principle to 2 dwellings on this site. And I think we have to have regard as well to the location of the site within a main market town, and whether ultimately parking spaces and off-street parking is a necessity in this location, or whether we could support car-free developments to encourage more sustainable modes of transport.
My first question, and it goes back to the previous application, if you recall, is can you confirm it's a standard requirement for vehicles to be able to enter and leave in a forward gear?
Yes, it's normally a requirement because I think even more so where visibility is impeded. I think in this particular case, an acceptable level of emerging visibility can be formed, but that assumes, from my understanding, that a vehicle can exit and enter the site in a forward gear.
And leave in a forward gear?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Nobody else down for questions, so we'll move into debate. Peter.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, this part of Matlock has needed some doing to it for quite a while, really. It's a bit PC, isn't it, with this garage being partially derelict, and this area of Graham on the other side of the road being a bit, wanted filling in. I welcome this development because it'll improve this part of Matlock, and it'll provide, these terrace housing will provide housing for younger people to start on the journey. And I think, yeah, in all, I think it's a good development, really. So I shall be supporting this, Chair.
Are you wanting to move it?
I'll move it, yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Slack. Councillor Fitzherbert.
And can I second that, please?
Thank you very much. Do you want to make any comment? No? Councillor Burford.
Can I just be clear, Chair, that we're considering these applications one by one, separately? Yeah. Of the 3 applications, I think this is the one that I certainly have got the least problem with. Mr. Brown was quite correct about the parking issues. I think the parking issues on Smedley Street, and in fact all that area of Matlock, are really serious, and I'm not sure whether that would be enough reason to refuse this application. I suspect not. I think, as Councillor Buttle said, it's very important that, eventually the right decisions are made about the materials. Presumably that would be gritstone and slate roofs, grey slate roofs, but I presume also that that's not something that we're deciding on tonight, but I'd like to think that we'd bear that in mind. I think some of the issues with the other 2 applications are more serious in my mind, but I am happy to go along with this one. I'm still concerned about that reversing onto Malvern Gardens. I'm hoping that can get sorted out.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Burford. Councillor Purdy.
Thanks, Chair. Well, I lived on the bank for a lot of years in the oldest property on Wellington Street from 1700 on. I never thought when I purchased a car from David George at Farmer's Garage in the 70s, I'd be sat here many years later making a planning decision on it. So it's sad to see Farmers go. But I look on that bank with interest, having lived there, and I do see some quality builds. I think what they've put on the corner of Smedley Street and those flats has been a credit to the area. I don't think we can resolve parking issues. I think that's a sign of the times, and everybody wants the car, and more difficult, of course, where to put them. So I'm in favour of the recommendation, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor O'Brien, and then I'll go to the vote.
And to reflect on what Councillor Purdy just remarked, that there is an excellent flatted development just 100 metres or so to the east of this site. I mean, I'm in favour of residential development on this site. I think it's absolutely appropriate. And I think, as well as providing accommodation, it will help knit the conservation area back together. It will fill in a gap site with an inappropriate development on. But I think what's proposed is a missed opportunity, actually. And I think we always have a problem when we get outline applications in conservation areas. People seek outline approval really so they can market the site, not so they can develop it themselves. So that's why you tend to get a very sketchy amount of detail. It's an approval in principle they're seeking. And we've quite correctly asked for details of layout and what have you, and we've got them. But when you look at the layout, because if you can put the layout back up on there, to me, you've got a layout with a parking space between two detached dwellings. Now, there's no way that when it comes to the reserve matters, there's no way, in my opinion, that you could achieve a satisfactory access and egress retaining those two detached dwellings in that place, in that location. So while we may think we're happy with that layout, the reality is that it can't work. The County Council haven't commented on the detail because, quite rightly, it's access is a reserved matter, so they're not in a position to give a detailed comment on that proposal. I thought the original proposal of a pair of semi-detached properties was far better and, in fact, more in keeping with the character of the conservation area, which is not characterised by small individual detached dwellings, characterised by terraces and semis. But I think Gary's quite right that there is still an opportunity here to have a development of the style and quality of the flatted development adjacent, which could provide a satisfactory access, probably 3 units, rather than just the 2, and achieve a much better design. So I'm disappointed with the quality of the application. I'm a little bit disappointed that we haven't challenged it more as an authority in saying that there is a better alternative. So while I won't vote against the proposal, I don't feel able to support it.
Okay, I've nobody down on my list, so it's been moved and seconded that the application.
Chair, excuse me, may I just come back and ask?
Yeah, of course you can, Gary.
Surely the design factor will come back to this committee, Chair.
Yeah. Reserve matters. Come back for reserve matters, I presume.
Yeah,
just to get the question, Chris.
Yeah, just to clarify.
Surely the design and materials will come back to this planning committee for decision.
It will. I think what we've got to be mindful of, though, in agreeing layouts and the amount of development, that we are effectively giving permission for 2 dwelling houses, as shown on that plan that's on the presentation currently. We recognise that there is a strong character on the southern side of Smedley Street, in particular, although there is a detached house within that street scene. The character of development on the northern side is much more diverse. Malvern Gardens, which sits in the background to the application site, are all detached properties. The street scene is much more varied on the northern side, and we feel that a development of 2 detached units on that site would actually reflect that existing character. So we have given quite careful thought to what's been presented to us, and obviously we're asked to consider applications and assess them on the merits. We're not here to influence or to change the nature of development that's submitted to us. We assess this application. We've assessed this application and considered it to be acceptable for the reasons stated.
Chair, could I just ask, if we were minded to approve this tonight, does that mean that we will get 2 detached houses, or is it possible that that could be a pair of semis when it comes to the, or it, you know, if we vote for it tonight, that's what we get, two detached properties?
In agreeing layout, what in effect you're agreeing is 2 detached dwellings as set out on that drawing. But we feel that is an appropriate form of development on this site. The local highway authority, the original proposal was for a pair of semis, but the highway authority raised some concerns, particularly with the parking that was shown to the west of the westernmost dwelling, and the wall on that boundary that you can't see on that plan because that impedes visibility onto the highway.
Okay, Councillor Birch. Okay, so it's been moved and seconded that the application be granted with conditions. All those in favour, please show. All those against? And any abstentions? 2, so that's been carried. So moving on, application 5.4, which is application number 21/01412 Arts, Farmers Garage Land adjacent to Smedley Street, outline planning permission for the erection of one dwelling with approval being sought for scale and layout. I don't know whether Mr. Brown wants to speak again on this. Nothing? And does the agent want to make any comment? Yeah, of course you can, yeah. So you've got 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, again for the opportunity to speak. I'll take it slightly differently, and I know we're considering each application on its individual merits, but just noting what members have said, then it's, you know, what we've got here is the opportunity to see the redevelopment of 3 sites very close together. And they don't offer much in terms of architecture and where as they stand. I think everybody's in agreement about that fact. What we then come forward with, we'll have a difference of opinion on whether it's a pastiche, whether it's a modern development, the design and aesthetic. What is clear from the process we're going through of outline is the concerns are raised around that, and how much information is going to be involved in what then comes back to the table in terms of a planning application and potentially back before planning committee. So again, just to pick up on another point, where we're dealing with this application, in a similar merit of the other application, there is a restrictive yellow line on the road, and certainly on the other application, that yellow line was put there to restrict vehicles from allowing access and egress issues to Farmers Garage when it was constructed. That's where that yellow line dates back to. So again, we have access points already established to these sites. Ultimately, we could move forward with car-free development. We also know the contention with that, so it's finding that level. And it may be that the reserve matters comes back without the car development. It may be it comes back with the car development. It will certainly only be delivering that form of development where it is acceptable to members and the highway authority. But in terms of this, we have noted some comments that were made in certainly in terms of its roof structure and orientation, and we've fully taken those on board, and they will obviously be minuted through tonight as well, and hopefully that will then deliver to the design of the desires of what comes forward with the reserve matters application. That's all I really want to pick up on for that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Chris, you again, I presume?
Yes, thank you, Chair. This site is slightly different to the previous site in that it's on the opposite side of the junction of Malvern Gardens and Smedley Street. There is an adjacent run of single-storey commercial properties, and then there's a range of buildings beyond that of varying heights, and the flatted development that's been referenced earlier in discussions. We feel that a single dwelling on that particular site would be acceptable in principle. We're generally happy with the layout again and the scale of development. The dwelling and the position of the dwelling on site would be offset slightly to the existing dwelling behind, so as to not again result in any unacceptable overbearing or overshadowing effects or loss of privacy. There are concerns about the built form and the appearance, but we're not considering the appearance and built form as part of this application. We're just considering the scale and the layout. I think it's important for this particular building, because of where it sits in the street scene, to address the corner and whether a dwelling that presents itself gable on to the street is appropriate form of development is a matter that we'll need to consider as part of any subsequent application. I'd suggest that that's not an appropriate built form, but obviously that's a subjective comment and something that we'll have to consider when we look at appearance. Happy to take questions at this stage.
Members, questions? Councillor Buttle, I presume. That's it. You need to indicate first, please.
If that's possible. So, Chris, you just said that you would be minded to accept an application in the future which has the ridge line running in the same line as the street, so that we could have more effective solar panels on them. Is that what you said?
I don't think we can be overly prescriptive on what we'd want to see. I think there's two ways of approaching development or redevelopment of this site. I think it's going down the traditional route, in which case you probably would want the property have its its eaves facing the Smedley Street, which would then allow the opportunity to introduce solar panels on a significant section of the roof of that property. But I wouldn't want to rule out a contemporary approach at the same time, and that might be a completely different form and nature to a more traditional building with a traditional built form.
Excellent, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Burfoot.
Thank you. Given that number 126 and 124 on Smedley Street are commercial properties, shop units, and this proposal for a dwelling will be 2-storey, this is the problem that I've got, that it's going to look a bit incongruous. Do we know whether the applicant or the agent have considered a commercial unit on that site, which would be 1-storey and would fit in better?
I can't confirm whether or not those discussions have been had. We've obviously been presented with this application, and we've assessed it on its merits and considered it to be acceptable.
I suppose I've asked that question to put it in the minds.
Yeah.
Anybody else wanting to ask questions? In which case, then I'll move into debate. Councillor Louise.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I was on the site visit yesterday. I'm quite happy to move this as officers' recommendations. I'm quite happy that this area is big enough to accommodate one dwelling, so I move officers' recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Louise. Councillor Fitzherbert.
I'm happy to second that, and I look forward to the reserve matters when they're available.
Okay. Anybody else wanted to make comment? Councillor O'Brien.
Well, I don't think the layout we're being asked to approve here is appropriate to this site. I think residential development is appropriate, but not the layout, and I'll just spell out briefly the reasons why. Can you put the photo image up? First of all, you'll see from the layout proposal that the access to this site is shown as being, can you go back to the photo, please? It's shown emerging through that lighting column in front of you and to the left onto the junction. So the layout that we're approving implies directly that the only way of accessing that site is onto the Smedley Street is directly where those broken white lines are and through that lighting column. As I said previously, that is simply not going to be approved. So I see no point in approving a layout in the knowledge that it's not capable of being delivered. There's a far more appropriate layout which retains a single dwelling, which puts the dwelling onto the corner, which addresses the corner of both roads, which I think is a way of enhancing the conservation area. So what we do is we have a built form up to the corner, so you avoid having a situation where you retain a car parking space on the corner. On the car parking space, you have a building which addresses both roads. So that is the way in good design that you use new development and conservation here to bring it back together. So you reverse the layout. So as I said, the dwelling we approved is reversed from where the car parking space is. So that, as I said, the dwelling addresses both roads, and that's a sort of appropriate development for the conservation area. It also enables you then to achieve a more satisfactory access without impinging on the junction. And the third reason is that by the current proposal is built up against the single-storey dwellings to the east. Now, what that means there, it will make it absolutely impossible, or 99% impossible, if any redevelopment scheme for the development of those two single-storey properties wanted to become forward. It would make it virtually impossible to achieve that, because you'd have one 2 and one 3-storey buildings hard up on either side. So it'd be very, very difficult to achieve that. If you reverse the layout as I'm suggesting, that gives you would give you far more flexibility in future if anyone wanted to bring forward a redevelopment of those two single-storey properties. So for those three reasons, I would suggest that while giving approval in principle to the proposal, we could achieve, for those three reasons, a far better layout and therefore development by having a reversal of what's shown on the indicative diagram, indicative plan.
Councillor Burfield.
I can't bring myself to vote to support this. We don't know the future of those number 126 and 124, but we are where we are, and they are there. And I may be the only person on this committee that thinks that a 2-storey detached house next to those single commercial, well, they are shops actually, a hairdressers and a shop. I just think it's going to look ridiculous visually.
Okay, nobody else down on my... Councillor Purdy, do you want to make any comment?
Yeah, sorry, Chair, it's what Councillor O'Brien and Councillor Birch have come up with. I tend to agree with Councillor O'Brien, and this is a concern we've always had, isn't it, with outline. You know, we always go away, what have we approved? And then it comes back, and it's some time later, so you've got a memory recollection problem, probably. So I am concerned about that orientation. I agree with Councillor O'Brien that it would probably be better orientated on the corner. I mean, we'd have to get a slide rule out and see whether what he's suggesting is feasible. But I think the question, Chris, is how cemented in stone are we with approving that? We're approving in principle a build. Does it have to be that design shown there and that, you know, number of floors? Or can it be accommodated with the views of this committee? And I go back to what I've said earlier. I'm always nervous when it's outlined. And I think all planning committee members are. And I think it's a way that planning developers and applicants, I don't say cheat the system, I don't want to be rude, but I think it gives them more leeway and more benefit to them than hard fasting us down, because what we see before us now isn't cemented. It's got a question mark on it.
Yeah, I think just to be clear, and just listening to the debate and what Councillor O'Brien has said, if members were approve the application in accordance with officer recommendation this evening, the layout is fixed. So the position or the footprint of that building is as set out on that particular plan. I think if members want a building to more closely address both Malvern Gardens and Smedley Street East, then my suggestion would be to defer this application so that can be explored, because what we don't know is if we move a building closer to Malvern Gardens, that might be problematic in terms of visibility from, you know, road users that use Malvern Gardens. There might be issues in terms of pedestrian visibility and visibility onto that part of Smedley Street. Might be fine, might be acceptable, but I think a deferment will be a safer route so we can explore that option and a building sited in a slightly different location on site. Because ultimately, if this application is approved this evening, the layout of the dwelling on site is fixed.
Can I move that amendment, Chair?
We already have
I'd like to move an amendment
to the application.
That we defer it for reconsideration of the layout.
Yeah, we've already got a motion on the table, so we have to see where that goes first.
Point of order, Chair, I'm able to make an amendment to a proposal on the table.
I've taken clarification from our solicitor, and there's already a motion on the table, so you can't, unless it is to change the recommendation, it's either to add or detract or take off, and it says the application be granted with conditions.
My amendment is that it's deferred.
Yeah, I mean, the only other route to do it is whoever moved and seconded it to withdraw it, so somebody could put something else on the table. So, I mean, Councillor Louise?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm happy to withdraw my recommendation then, because I was led to understand yesterday that it was for a dwelling on that site, and we did actually speak about moving it to the side, putting the car park in the other side. So I'm happy to withdraw my recommendation and go for a deferral.
Right, so you're retracting it on deferral. Does that find a second with you, Councillor Fitzherbert?
Yes.
So it's been moved and seconded for deferral. I think, Chris, you know where the committee's coming from. So on that basis, I'll move to the vote. So all those in favour for the deferral, please show. All those against? And any abstentions? So it's been deferred. So I think we've set out the reasons quite reasonably. So moving swiftly on. Again, this is another application there. So this is application number. I want to find the damn thing. This is application number 21/01447 out of land between County Council Co-op, buildings 107, 113 Smedley Street, and audit building 150, 117 Smedley Street, Matlock, Derbyshire, out of planning permission for the erection of 5 dwellings with approval being sought for scale and layout. Don't know whether the agent wants to speak again on this, or do you want to speak again, Mr. Brown? Yeah, but it's quite all right.
Yeah, and if I could just ask the committee just one other question. I noticed the very first application that we received, that wasn't the one that the public commented on because it had been changed. Is that acceptable? Is that how it goes? The one that I commented on online was the original semi-detached development. And the one that we've seen tonight is for 2 detached developments. When did that change happen, and are the public notified of that? That was one thing that came to mind.
Chris, can you offer any light on that?
Yeah, so as part of considering the application, the representations received, the applicant is able to make amendments to address any concerns. And those amendments are normally published in a timely manner for the public to be able to see. And obviously you've had the opportunity to comment on all the application details ahead of planning committee consideration this evening. It's clear in the officer's report there has been amendments and what those amendments are.
Sorry, it's not for you to report that there's been amendments?
Not formally, no, because the nature of development is the same. The changes are relatively minor and are reported in the report that you've been notified of. So you should have seen the officer's report this evening and been able to read that and understand what changes have been made and being able to comment and participate in this meeting to comment on those changes.
Right, but that's only because I've turned up. So all the other residents in that area who've commented, of which there are a significant number of comments on that first application, will not have seen the change. And I know you're saying it's not significant, but you're talking about rotating a building through 90 degrees, yet we've gone from a pair of semis slapped together with car parking either side to 2 detached buildings. For me, that is significant. And why are the public not made clear of that? Just one thing.
It's not to have the debate here. It's perhaps something we need to discuss after the meeting.
It's something we need to do out of this meeting.
Just to clarify, everyone that's made representations on this application have been notified of the committee meeting this evening. They've been provided with details of the officer's report, so they should be able to understand what's being considered this evening and the changes that have been made. So just to clarify that point, but if you want to continue that after the meeting, that's fine.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine.
Okay, so do you want to make any more comment?
It was only just about this particular development, and then just to reiterate, because I know that there's been a lot of talk tonight, so it was just simply around my understanding from the original application on this, there's no consideration for parking at all. There's 5 dwellings, 5 family dwellings, and I make the same point as before. Smedley Street is crammed, and I know you want to encourage car-free development. Come on, let's live in the real world. Kids are staying at home till they're 20 and 30. That's 4 cars per family. 5 developments, 4 cars. Do the maths. There's no parking spaces. So that's all I'd like to say on this one.
Okay,
But thank you very much for the opportunity. Appreciate
thank you. Mr. Foote, do you want to make any more comments? You know you've got 5 minutes and
Thank you, Chair. I won't use all the 5 minutes. Just to come back, again, slightly unusual because we have this from over 3. We have explored the commercial aspect and what can be delivered across the sites, including all 4 sites that in relation to Farmers Garage. We have taken market advice and we have looked at uses that would be appropriate in what is your tier 1 assessment hierarchy, where housing is greatly needed. And what we aim to deliver is that housing development that is really needed. I'm not saying commercial development isn't needed, but it's where we've got conflicting uses potentially with residential developments that surround them. Then it would be beneficial to see something that can work with the existing uses and see an enhancement of the conservation area as its delivery. Just on a second note, which again will form completely out of context, we do have a 4th site, which I'm hoping when we bring that one to committee, we will be also able to bring the amended scheme of the former application back to committee. But again, I do apologise, that is completely out of context. Thank you.
okay, thank you very much. What I need now is I've got to need a motion to extend the meeting by half an hour. Councillor Dunn, are you prepared to second it? All those in favour, please shout. Right, thank you very much. Chris, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. We've previously considered redevelopment of the sites on the opposite side of Smedley Street, where the existing car showroom building is and the associated adjacent parking area. This application relates to land on the opposite side of Smedley Street, and the character of development on that side of the street is notably different, as members will have appreciated from the site visit yesterday. And we are generally comfortable that a terrace of 5 dwellings of the height indicated would respond positively to the character of development on that side of Smedley Street. I think members will agree that the plans that have been submitted are very simple and poor in terms of the appearance of the proposed dwellings, and it is, I think, a clear message that the applicant should take away from this meeting tonight is that appearance or that form of or that design of dwelling house wouldn't be acceptable for this part of the conservation area. We'd expect architectural detailing and an appearance that's more reflective of the architecture and the character of properties in this part of Matlock. But we are happy that the amount of development is acceptable in terms of responding positively to the site's context. There is a limited amount of amenity space serving these dwellings. That's recognised. However, other properties in the area are also served by limited amounts of private amenity space. Again, we're in a town location. There's access to services and facilities and existing parks and gardens, etc. We don't feel that that's a significant constraint to development in this particular case. I'm happy to take questions. I think members should note that there is a condition recommended because from the representations received, there is recognition that this was the site of a former petrol filling station. There may be some contamination on the site, so there is a condition to recognise that, and if any contamination is found, then obviously we need to make sure there's measures in place to rectify that. Happy to take questions.
Councillor Slack.
Thank you, Chair. I know it's only we're coming back again to this, Chris, but looking at the terraced houses, at Works we've got a similar problem where all the bins are in front of the houses on the pavement. So have we got walkways at the back, either side, to go round the back with the bins? Has that been taken into account?
You'll note the specific requirement for details of bin storage to be provided. If you look at the layout on the screen, you can see a modest access down the side of one of the properties, which would provide an area or a route to the rear of these buildings to provide some area for bin storage.
Yeah.
And obviously collection would be on street, as with many other properties along this section of Smedley Street.
They bring them out in the morning, ready for collection back here.
But details of bin storage and collection is a matter for consideration.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Burfoot.
Can I ask, how many bedrooms are there likely to be in these terraced houses?
In agreeing scale, we are effectively agreeing to 2.5 storey. If you look at the height of these buildings to eaves, what we're dealing with, I mean, they're quite narrow buildings in footprint terms, but they do have 3 floors of accommodation. The number of bedrooms at this stage is unknown, but what we can be, what we do know is that the buildings will be of the height indicated as part of this application. So 7.4 metres in depth, 6.2 metres in height to eaves, and up to 9 metres to ridge height.
Okay. Councillor Buckley.
I actually really like these. I think they're going to be really good. I've got a couple of concerns. The bike storage, the secure bike storage. When the highways say they want secure bike storage, are they talking about if there's going to be 2 grown people and 2 adults? Are they talking about secure bike storage for 4 bicycles per car round the back? Is that what they mean? Or are they talking about just a little shed somewhere?
That's a question that's better directed to the local highway authority. They have indicated that they have no objections in principle, subject to provision being made for secure bike storage. But what that means in reality is not something that I can confirm at this meeting.
I expect we're going to want to find that out. Chimneys and dormers. There are chimneys and dormers on the co-op next door and what have you. I know Tom will like to have chimneys on this. It seems reasonably likely. But, you know, that's detail that will come through the next stage, the actual planning application. Is that right?
It is right. I think you are correct in picking up on those important design features of the more traditional properties that you tend to find on this along this part of Smedley Street. We'd want the architectural detailing if they were to go down a traditional route, which I would suggest is an appropriate route to go down in this particular for this particular site. We would want the architectural detail to be reflective of that existing character and those existing properties that sit adjacent to this site.
Yeah, exactly. And there will be access down both sides, so somebody won't have to go around and walk past the back of 4 other houses. Or is that because it looks to me like there might be only access down one side?
Yeah, it's not clear on that particular plan, but if I just get you the actual plan out of the file. It does show, I think, a modest access on either side, but certainly the access to the east is slightly wider. Yeah, so there's access both sides. It's not really clear on that drawing, but I can scale it off for you. This is a question that you should have asked me before the meeting, but I can provide you with that. So no, it's okay. So we're looking at a distance of a metre either side, so sufficient space to be able to walk down the side of the properties with a standard sort of wheelie bin.
Bicycle or a bin.
Or a bicycle, yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
A yard in old money. So anyway, I have nobody else down for questions, so I'll move into debate. Councillor Purdy.
Chair, well, I know it's an artist's impression, but I don't like the design. It reminds me of something on Dartmoor. There's good quality builder, and I'm pleased to hear Chris saying we need and insist on good quality. It is a conservation area. You only have to look around Smedley Street to see what is available. And even going back to these Victorian buildings, there's some, you know, if they were stone cleaned, they'd look fabulous. What's the word I'm looking for? Jet wash, whatever.
Sandblasters.
Sandblaster, thank you. They look fabulous, and they will be fabulous on the day. And the new build surrounding, just off this end of Smedley Street, I think they've done a really good job. So we do insist on good quality. I'm happy to move the recommendations, Chair, and hope that good quality materials and design will come back.
So I find a seconder. Peter? Peter, do you want to second it? Okay. Anybody else wishing to speak in debate? Councillor Burford.
Can I say first of all that, you know, Mr. Brown is quite correct about the parking issues, but I realise that that's not really something that we can do anything about here. The fact that there could be 3 bedrooms in these houses times 15 15 bedrooms could be, I don't know how many cars. I think something that, again, maybe we can't discuss tonight, but there is a single yellow line in front of on the road there. And I don't know whether members realise how long it takes to get a TRO through the county council. The waiting time at the moment is about 4 years, apparently. I've been waiting 4 years for about 20 in Matlock, so I don't know whether that can be brought forward. My issue here is overdevelopment, really. I'm not against development there, but I think 5 is just too much. There aren't any other terraced houses in that part of Smedley Street.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor O'Brien.
Well, I would love to see this form of development, obviously appropriately designed, coming forward. I'll just offer a prediction that when we get the details coming in, it will be for 3 or 4 units with a car parking spaces to the side.
Okay. Thank you very much, Councillor O'Brien. So it's been moved and Neil, you have to be quicker, Neil.
I'll be very swift. What about the sewerage? You know, Severn Trent are obliged to take it away, but they've not been terribly reliable on that sort of thing in the past. Is there some way that this committee can actually be more specific and ask Severn Trent, can you actually take this away and guarantee that it's going to be taken away properly?
The simple answer to that is no, I think. So anyway, it's been moved and seconded. That application be granted with conditions. All those in favour, please shout. All those against? So that's been carried. Thank you very much. And the last on our list is our own application, which is the one at Riverside Derwent Gardens, South Parade. Who's taking this one? Okay, Sarah. Away you go.
Right, obviously this is this application relates to the structures associated with the illuminations on the western side of the river. There's been numerous repeat planning applications for this temporary development approved over the past years. The last one being in 2018, which went up to the period of 2020. This application would extend up to 2026. And here's a few sort of pictures of what these structures are and where they are. They're in Derwent Gardens on the western side of the river only.
Okay, I don't know whether you want to add any more, Sarah, because I think we've
yeah.
been here before. Any member wants to ask questions before, or shall we just move straight into debate? So, Councillor Purdy.
Chair, I'd love to move it as it's my ward and I'm on the working group with Dave Turvey and Nicola and others and Matlock Bath Parish Council and some traders. We took a brave decision last year. We didn't think after the pandemic it would work, but it was a huge success. We sold over 58,000 tickets last year. I believe so. We've already sold, I think, nearly 5,000 at present. So, you know, Matlock Bath is a unique spot. And we know from our research that visitors stay in hotels as far away as Hathersage. So this is not just a benefit for Matlock Bath, it's a benefit hugely for the district. So more than happy to move that as a recommendation.
Okay, Councillor Donnelly.
Yes, Chair, I'm happy to second it.
Anybody else wanted to speak in debate? No? All those in favour, please show. I won't ask against because that's a unanimous decision. So item 6 is just for noting. I therefore move. Second, all those in favour, please show. And thank you very much, members. That brings us to the close of this July planning meeting. Hope to see you in August. No.